everyone. Welcome to UnchartedX. My name is Ben. This video is a podcast, a conversation with my good mate Chuck from the CF Apps 7865 channel. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work. We had been talking on Skype and we thought it would be a good opportunity to record another podcast. We've done a couple of these previously. Today we're going to be talking about the Valley Temple at Giza and the Sphinx and reviewing some of my footage from various trips to that area, along with some archival footage of the same that I found, and kind of giving you our thoughts and some of the insight into some of our research. Chuck's done a ton of research into these monuments over the years, so I hope you enjoy the video. Cheers. Welcome back to the podcast. This video, you'll see it both on my channel, UnchartedX, and also on Chuck's channel, who I'm joined with today from the CF Apps 7865. How you doing, Chuck?
Good, Ben. How are you today?
Not too bad, not too bad. Getting better. I have had a touch of the plague recently, but we're improving, thankfully. And it's been a while. We haven't talked for a minute, at least not recorded a talk for a minute, and thought it was a good opportunity to do so today.
Right. I always enjoy talking to you on Skype, and it's about time we recorded one.
Indeed, yes. And without any further ado and any more pictures of me, we can get into it. So we were looking for something to talk about and sort of reviewing some footage, and we've kind of settled on taking a nice close look at the Valley Temple and the Sphinx. Always, favorite topics.
It's a lot to ponder, and it's one reason why we don't have a lot of solid answers. It's just a great mystery. A lot of confusing stuff.
Yeah, you get reports of this all throughout time, right? We've got ancient reports of it. We have relatively recent reports of it. We've obviously got modern reports and opinions on all of this. So just to set up the footage and talk a little bit about what we've got here, I've got a collection of footage that I've picked up from a couple different trips to Egypt. We've got some pictures and also going to jump in with a couple of other bits and pieces of footage from around the net. I know, Chuck, you've got some stuff from John Anthony West, and I've got some quotes from Petrie, as well as some footage that I found from the 1930s exploring these areas.
There is so much written from about a century ago that is super interesting to read. Indeed.
Yeah, and in fact, I've been really enjoying archive.org. There's just so much that you can find on that website, and in particular, this video. Like ever since I found some My Doom footage of digs at the site there with the Cox expedition. There's all sorts of old black and white footage of looking at these sites. It's really nice to get a look at them from different periods of time.
There's a lot of digital archives that you can literally page through Petrie's books, what he wrote here a long time ago. And that's a good thing to review, because you're getting that information from kind of somebody who hasn't seen a lot on Egypt. He's just basing his info on what he sees, and not a lot of other stuff is filtered in.
Right.
So I think those are interesting things to read.
Yeah, it gives you. It is that. It's like an unfiltered approach. He does evaluate sites pretty cleanly, and to me, it's. I like the perspective of not all of it's been discovered at that point. Not all of it's been cleared out of sand and debris. I mean, the view that we get of this today, of the Valley Temple, which is just monstrous construction made of limestone and granite, it was filled up with sand, and there were shards of bowls and diorite statues, and it hadn't been cleared out until it was guys like Petrie that they were some of the first people, at least in modern times, to dig these things out of the sand and really evaluate them.
Right, and when a lot of those people were at the Great Pyramid, the base was covered probably about 50 feet up with sand and debris.
Yeah, and that's what they say. In fact, I've got some footage from the 30s when it was still covered with sand and debris.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one of my. I haven't really done a video on the Valley Temple. I do intend to do like a researched and well-produced video on it at some point. But it's just one of my favorite structures because it's just so massive. It's for people that don't know, it's like this inner core that you're seeing on those big giant blocks. They're all limestone, and they've come from the Sphinx enclosure. So as they sort of mined the enclosure that the Sphinx sits in, they've lifted these giant blocks of limestone, many of which are well over 100 tons.
Right, and that well over 100 tons. I mean, we talk about blocks from like Baalbek that are 1,000 tons. So when we say 100 tons, sometimes that perspective gets lost, but we would need a crane today to move those. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty simple. Not a large crane, but we would need a crane or a truck with a counterbalance in it.
Well, for sure, yeah, and it's not a. I mean, you could build a temple out of smaller blocks, but they chose to build them out of these giant blocks. And in fact, this is. I don't think the camera stays on this too long. I'm just going to pause it here because these blocks here are fascinating, and these are you can see the polished and well finished nature of these curved blocks, and these were the original facing or casing blocks made of granite, and that's one of the things that makes the Valley Temple so really strange and special is that its inner masonry is limestone, but then at some point after that, it was cased in just gigantic blocks of granite, and the inner structure's all made of granite. It's it's a real sort of mystery why they went to so much trouble to do this, but the actual original facade, if you like, on this was this just sort of perfectly shaped and formed outer layer of granite.
But through today's modern thinking, we think it's very strange. To them, it might have been something
normal,
totally expected and normal. It's just so far back in history, we just don't know how these people think or thought.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum. And even Petrie commented on it. I mean, one of the things that he says, this is quoting from his book, The Pyramids and Temples of Giza. It seems that both of them were, quote, both of them were built with a core of megalithic blocks of limestone, ranging in their weight to over 100 tons each, and these were cased by massive blocks of granite or of alabaster, end quote. And we'll see a bunch of alabaster in here, which is something that I find really interesting. When you find alabaster, it's not the most common form of stone. It's a really strange stone to see worked. It's been a favorite target of quarrying. But
alabaster is on the flooring here?
I think it's mostly, I don't know if the floor's alabaster here. I think it's granite.
I think John Anthony West mentions one part of the Valley Temple, and he shows it in a video that I have when he's leading one of his tours, but he says the floor is alabaster.
Okay. Yeah, for sure I know that there's those side passages near the Sphinx that are alabaster. And as you go in here, the massive nature of these blocks of granite, it kind of takes my breath away just watching it, because these must have been so difficult to shape and form and move. And of course, remind everyone that there's no granite quarries anywhere near Giza. These granite blocks have been shipped in for 500 miles away, likely from Aswan. Most of this is pink granite.
But they say this was built in the 4th dynasty.
Yeah, Petra.
And then construction technique just kind of declines. Is that the way history works?
Right. Yeah, that's a point I like to make a lot. And my friend Little Mo here is pointing out the size of this one block of granite here in the corner. It's humongous. And again, super fine joinery, just no appreciable gaps whatsoever. If you look closely at the corners, you'll see that this is that typical sort of blocks that go around the corner themselves. There's one great example of it with a block there. It's not a straight seam line in the corners. The blocks were actually put in, and then they were probably finished, and the corner was made into them. That's
bizarre. Now, have you seen places in Peru that show the same kind of technique?
Yeah, definitely. We see this. I called it out in my Doom video recently, but particularly places like the Coricancha, exactly the same technique. We see blocks that have been very, very accurately placed in terms of their joinery, and then the corners are carved into them such that the blocks appear to turn the corner on their own. This is what they would call, I guess, the inner temple. I got some. We don't know that this was a temple. It's just the name we give it. It's like it's hard to call it anything other than the Valley Temple. But this is there's a courtyard in here with these columns. There are, I think, 13 of them now, and they weigh around 13 tons each. These columns that you'll see once we pan off the wall here, and I think the roofing blocks are around 8 or 9 tons each, according to. Actually, some of the support beams on the top, or the large blocks, are up to 18 tons, according to Petrie.
To me, it's a temple of what we call Osiris today.
Right.
That's the best explanation, one that makes the most common sense to me, we have one down at Abydos that we call the Osiren, the Osirion. I mean, there is a reason why we call it that, and I think that goes way back in time. Osiris is the Greek name, but there is an ancient name, Asar, A-S-A-R, that is the name for Osiris, and I think this is a temple kind of dedicated to him in the afterlife. That just makes the most sense, especially where it is right next to that ancient shrine right there.
Yeah. Yeah, this is...
That was supposedly his guardian.
Yes, the large statue.
The shrine, they call it the ancient text.
What's interesting here is it is very similar to the Osirion, but I just pause it for a second. And if you notice, there's a lot of symmetry built into this tunnel. This gets called out in what is it? The Revelations of the Pyramids. There are a number of spots where there is symmetry in these corners from one side to the other. Perhaps this isn't the best example. I'll show you another example coming up, but in a lot of cases, it's not sort of a random arrangement of stones. There are spots where you have basically the same arrangement of stones on both sides of a passageway or of a hall. So there's some sort of deliberate design that went into this.
Sure.
It's not just let's make these blocks fit where they fit.
Everything had intent and purpose.
Yeah.
And there was some niches in the floor. Do they think there were statues in there at one time, or what are those?
Yeah, those are supposedly statues or niches for statues. There were quite a number of statues found in here, and Petrie he reports finding just shards of broken alabaster and diorite statues, very quartzite statues. Also the bowls and machined objects. So if I get right into the machining in a lot of my topics and videos, and he talks about these very fine lines and machining marks in a bunch of the fragments and the pieces that they found in here. Of course, there's nothing left here right now, but a lot of this, there was an awful lot of broken material and broken bits and pieces found in this temple by a number of explorers. In fact, Mariette, I think I pinned this on Howard Weiss at one point, but Mariette blew up several of these of those columns that we saw. It's there's actually a little quote from it here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, 6 of these beams. This is quoting Petrie one more time as we see this wall here. Quote: six of these beams, or a third of the whole, are now missing. The Arabs say that they were found lying dislodged in the temple, and that Mariette, when clearing up the place to exhibit, had them blasted to pieces by soldiers. And he actually wasn't sure this was true, but he had it confirmed later on, and it seems to be accurate that Mariette did indeed blast these to pieces. This here I find particularly interesting, these couple of doorways. Let me just back that up for a second. So as you walk up, this is one other thing I wanted to mention about the temple, is that this is only the lower level of what was a at least two-leveled structure. This was all covered. It all had a roof, and all of that area inside with the Assyrian-looking space had a roof, and then there was supposedly another level on top of that was most likely open to the sky. But it may have been 40 or 50 feet high in originality, because these passageways supposedly lead up to that second level, which is now all gone. It's all been quarried.
Right. There has been a lot of destruction in Giza. We're pretty amazed by what's still here, but really it's probably just a fragment or just a remnant or whatever they cannot haul away.
Yeah.
And that's why we don't have a lot of solid answers, because really we just have huge blocks, and so much of the smaller stuff is gone.
Yeah.
That kind of would have given us good clues.
There's a few things in these doorways. So these are interesting little doorways. They're always shut. I don't know anybody that's been able to get in here, but one thing you may notice is that the change in color of the stone. That's because it's not granite in here. There is a mixture of granite, and this is alabaster, or it's like crystallized limestone that comes off in sheets. It forms, it's essentially crystal. But all of these blocks in here are alabaster, which is just sort of astonishing to see. And you can tell the difference when you pan up and you see that, okay, the block on top is granite. You get that regular color of granite, but the most of the massive blocks that form this actual passageway are alabaster.
Okay. But I know, just reviewing some stuff, John Anthony West says alabaster to the Egyptians represented air, the red granite represented fire, limestone water, and sandstone represented the earth, kind of the four elements. So that is something that I just thought I'd bring up.
Yeah.
If that fits in any of this, I haven't really taken it, in total context, but something to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely strange. It's just, and these were targets for quarrying as well. Same thing on the other side too. Again, this doorway is never open, but you can stick a camera through it as we've done. And again, these are blocks of alabaster on top of blocks of granite. And I've got a little quote from Petrie here that talks about it from his book, which is, quote, the pyramids and temples of Giza, quoting from that. Another covered chamber also exists, branching from the entrance passage. That this is built of alabaster and granite. Opposite to the entry is a doorway leading to an inclined passage, which was the ascent up to the former roof of the Great Hall. This passage is of alabaster and the upper doorway of granite. End quote. And Petrie also comments on these holes, these circular tubular drill holes. He actually mentions that they had the stubs of the cores that were drilled that were in there. He
Really?
Yeah, he mentions that they, quoting again from Petrie, says, "There are the pivot holes cut in the granite lintel by a jeweled tube drill that are plainly to be seen, with the stump of the core left by the drill still sticking in the southern hole." So, end quote. And then when you're here, you walk out from the Valley Temple. We'll come back and take a bit more of a look at the Valley Temple again, but this is where you come out. This is the main tourist access to the Sphinx, which, of course, everybody probably recognizes.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of work done to the Sphinx here. I want to point out a couple things. So there's a big wooden, like a deck that's been built over the front paws of the Sphinx, and we don't know what's under there or why particularly this was built, given that it's just a limestone floor. There's no real reason for this I can understand the reason for the stairs, but the reason for this platform deck that's
one
here.
One of the early explorers in a video I did a couple years ago did a diagram of what he found down here when he excavated, and he put stairs right below that wooden platform there.
That's interesting, isn't it?
I don't know how accurate that could have been, but I think I made a video about that about 2 years ago, but he clearly put stairs right there.
Yeah. And I have an interesting story about it as well. This is kind of a hearsay story from people in Egypt that live in this area. And that is that I think it was the 80s or the 90s, somewhere around there. They've had various concerts at the Sphinx. They light up there's a light show every night and that type of thing. And occasionally they throw big concerts and things here. And apparently there was a stage built across the Paws in this whole area of the Sphinx. And it was all closed off for building of this stage, presumably for a week or two before this concert. And sources say that there were trucks coming in and out bringing like rubble and dirt, and this was a 24-hour-a-day operation for a while, which seemed like this was a lot of effort to go to for just building a stage for a concert. And it obviously the implication is that potentially they were doing some actual work and digging here while they had the cover of this stage and the whole setup that was sort of closing this area off from public view for a period of a couple of weeks. And then after that, I think we have these wooden decks and this construction work over the front of it, and of course the horrible repair work to the paws of the Sphinx.
Right. That the true form has been covered up, but there is some good pics from the 1830s that show the original form of the paws. They certainly tell a story in my eyes.
Indeed, yeah, I know you do a lot of work on the Sphinx, the Anubis. Likely being the Anubis statue back in the day. I mean, it's pretty obvious, just the head. I mean, you can tell how the head has been recarved in terms of it just proportion-wise doesn't really fit the body.
And supposedly the body has been buried for a long time,
right? Yet
that shows all the erosion and the head doesn't, and the head has what has been exposed for the time that we know it to have been around, so
that's an excellent point.
Makes no sense.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's one of the reasons that, it seems likely that Robert Schoch's dating of it seems to be the most legitimate dating from a geological perspective. The idea that the walls of the enclosure and even the body of the Sphinx, you can see the erosion. the idea that that's wind and sand is just it's a strange conclusion to make when if you give the Sphinx 50 years or so without continually removing the sand, it pretty much gets buried up to its neck again in fairly short order. And I think you mentioned to me when we were talking about this that it's something like 2/3 of the time that we think the Sphinx has been there it's been buried up to its neck or thereabouts for around 2/3 of that time that it's actually been there.
Well, why don't I just talk about that and just show you here what I'm talking about there?
Yeah.
For the 4,700 years that we know the Sphinx has been around, we know that it has been buried for at least 3,300 of those years.
Right.
It was uncovered around the 4th dynasty when they said they were going to repair the monument. That's what the priests of Khufu say, that they are repairing these monuments, not that they were built in this time. We know that Tutmosis uncovered it in the 18th dynasty, and we know the Romans uncovered it, but we know it's been buried for 3,300 years of the supposed 4,700 years it's been around. So where did all this erosion come from? And how come the old dynasty put repair blocks in erosion grooves that would have taken thousands of years to, evolve? The story we are told about when the Sphinx is built is totally wrong if you just look at all the evidence and just use some common sense in my eyes.
Yeah, I would agree. It certainly seems older than that. I mean, just the erosion alone, even regardless if you assume it was wind and sand or water erosion, as Robert Schoch says, it still seems like that would take a longer period of time to achieve than what we give it. It feels like it was ancient in ancient times.
Right. Herodotus never mentioned it because I think all that was sticking up was part of the head.
Right.
But certainly a great mystery, because I think even to the Egyptians, the true original form was lost to them. I think that all happened back in the maybe the 5th or 6th dynasty when something really bad happened in Egypt, when the main god of Egypt changed to, the main god of Giza at least, changed to what we know as Osiris today. So it's, I don't know. I've talked about the Sphinx a lot, and when the Greeks come in and change it to a lion, change everything to their mythology in Egypt, they change Thoth to Hermes, they change the falcon statues down at Thebes to the Colossus of Memnon, which is a totally Greek thing.
Right.
And that name comes from a story where these statues in the morning, they would actually kind of make a whistling hum, and that's how the Greeks attached the Colossus of Memnon to those statues. So everything becomes Greek, and this shrine they change it from a dog to a cat in my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough to say. That's one of the things when we look at all this stuff today. That's why I appreciate finding any older references to look at these sites from an earlier time, because they change over time, and particularly as civilizations touch them and renovate them and change them and adopt them into their own cultures. We see that time and time again. It makes it hard to really determine origins.
What did the Egyptians do, even when just the pharaohs change? And this isn't something that just changes from dynasty to dynasty. Sometimes it happens when the rulers change. They deface the old statues and shrines and gods.
Right. Yeah.
And just go on. So something 1,000 years before is going to be totally lost to them.
Yeah. I have some very good examples of that. Yusuf showed me at Tanis. In fact, there's obelisks where you can see how they did that. And there's actually the erasure of hieroglyphs, and where they were rewriting over it. You actually have one block it's in progress. You can see this working in progress.
And of course, a lot of the
size of
these statues, they hack off the nose.
Yep.
Have you seen evidence of that?
Oh, there's lots of defacing. I don't know when specifically that happened, but
the nose seems to be a central object of that, or the mouth gets hacked off. And to the Egyptians, that's where the breath of life came in. So if you hack off the nose or the mouth, then that kind of loses that appeal to them.
Yeah, I have seen it a lot where the face and that, I guess it's the nose and the mouth area is all smashed up, and that's typically what gets destroyed.
because statues were the living embodiment of the person or the king or the pharaoh. Literally, it was a living embodiment. So if you take off the nose, the breath of life comes in through the nose, then the statue is kind of dead. That's the way they looked at it.
I do like this shot looking back at the Valley Temple, just the size of the limestone blocks. It always just cracks me up looking at the massive amount of masonry there is there. Let's so this I just want to introduce this clip a little bit, and I'm going to unmute this. And Chuck, you won't be able to hear this audio for this little. I think it's the next minute and a half. But I wanted to give people just a bit of background. This was on the Graham Hancock trip. This was an early morning private entrance into the Sphinx. We're actually standing between the paws of the Sphinx, and on this trip it was the one with the great Zahi Hawass, of course.
I'm a scientist.
Was supposedly going to debate Graham Hancock, but part of the deal was you got to spend a little bit of time with Zahi, and he likes to give his little lecture in between the paws of the Sphinx. So I was wandering around trying to take footage, and you will hear a little bit of Zahi speaking in the background.
And another scene showing David and another scene and the musical David sing and the musical then when they put the cobblestone on the pyramid, when they put the cobblestone on the pyramid, the major important discovery that they made. The major important discovery that they made, in my opinion, actually is the most important discovery that in my opinion is the most discovery that the Welshman discovery of the pyramid. And when recently, the area of the workman recently, the area style of the tombs is a style of tombs of Ghana, the style of the tombs, and I will say style of today more about it. The workman.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a little bit of him talking about how they recently discovered the tomb of the workmen that built the pyramids. And one other thing, now that the audio's not playing, is that I know we'll talk about this in a minute. I have some pictures of it, but this is a very interesting little sort of, I guess, another temple area that's over on the right-hand side of the Sphinx as you're looking at it. And I know you've done a few videos looking at this area.
Yeah, I did one about maybe 2 or 3 years ago where I included a clip from John Anthony West, but that doorway frames the face of the Sphinx, and it was built by Amenhotep III, and I think it was all about whose face was on the Sphinx, and Tutmosis IV, cartouche is in there, and it seems to be dedicated to Tutmosis IV. And maybe on the video that I upload of this talk, I will leave the link to that video. But why would you have a temple that frames the face of the Sphinx that's dedicated to Tutmosis IV if his face wasn't on it? Now, there are very few candidates for whose face is on the Sphinx. Tutmosis IV uncovered it all. He erected the Dream Stela, and we know the beard that was once on this. Even Mark Lehner says it was carved in the 18th dynasty. So if you carve the face and the beard, you have to do that at the same time.
Right.
So I think everything that, if we look at all the evidence, I think the best candidate is Tutmosis IV. He uncovered the Sphinx. It comes from that time period. He has a temple right there, and it frames his face.
Yeah, we get another look at this that is like doorways that line up aiming directly at the face of the Sphinx.
Right, and this temple was here early in the 20th century, and it has been lost in the last century. And in the video I made, I show what that looked like in its original form. But that is built on a perfect 90-degree plan from the Great Pyramid.
Ah, okay.
It's very interesting. I think I show that in that video.
Yeah. This is an interesting thing that you see a lot of people talk about, is this notch underneath the ear. I don't really know what it means. It doesn't seem to me to be anything other than just a notch in here. I do have some close-up pictures of it, but it's kind of a weird little feature on the side of the head of the Sphinx.
Yep, that is interesting. What does that represent?
Hard
Who
to
knows?
say. Yeah. And of course, the beard from the Sphinx is still in the Egyptian Museum. Now, this is the
Right.
this is where a lot of the controversy for the Sphinx, I guess, originated. This is the left-hand side of the enclosure wall that Robert Schoch dates to well before the Egyptian civilization, based on his analysis of it being essentially rainfall erosion from the period when this was a verdant area, likely as at the end of the Pleistocene kind of date.
A lot of erosion, and if this was actually built in the Fourth Dynasty, and that much rainfall, which Schoch says it was, fell and eroded that much of the Sphinx enclosure, well, the mud brick pyramid,
Right.
those would be eroded into a pile of mud if that much rain did that to the limestone.
Yeah.
So I don't think that makes much sense. And the enclosure, we call it, I think they do have a name for it in the ancient text, and they call it the divine booth.
Ah.
That is our translation, the divine booth. And if you look up booth in the dictionary, the second definition is enclosure.
It is booth. And the other thing to note, there is plenty of granite laying around on the floor. There's a lot, and there must have been either casing stones or there must have been other granite work done in here that has long since been quarried. But there is tons of it laying around. And I like this picture just because it shows you ancient repair work, sort of Roman repair work, modern repair work. There's been so much repair work done to this original limestone body. It's hard to tell exactly what's original and what isn't, but
But clearly, I don't think there's any dispute. There is old kingdom repair blocks and grooves that would have taken thousands of years to erode.
Right, like
That is
this.
such an important point.
Yeah, and it's what they said. And then this is the infamous, there's nothing under the Sphinx and no doorways. And of course, if you
Right.
if you get into the pit and you go around behind it, there's quite clearly an opening and a passageway that leads underneath it.
And people are familiar with Robert Temple. He has gotten down there and done quite a bit of work on places we cannot get into around this monument.
Yeah, I'd love to get in there one day myself, but I mean, I know there's been a few videos looking at it. Then this is all in the limestone bedrock on the bottom again. I don't know why you need a wooden platform to cover up limestone bedrock if there's nothing in front of the paws of the Sphinx, but that's what it is. This is the stele.
And I believe it's attached to Khafre
Right.
because of one syllable,
Yeah.
Kaf, in the text. And do you know how many rulers had Kaf in their name? That is such an important little snippet of language from the Egyptians, but they say Khafre. Well, it's got to be him. And that's very flimsy, very flimsy.
Indeed. Yeah, we don't know. I mean, the implication is that he may have repaired it, not built it.
Repaired it is fine because that's, in fact, what the priests of the Fourth Dynasty say.
You can see.
They literally say that.
Yeah.
They repaired these monuments.
I like this little shot of driving. We've got a couple different angles to look at where the Sphinx sits, but this little shot of driving down the road that's next to the causeway gives you a sense of kind of the slope that's in the causeway and the change in elevation between the Sphinx and the pyramids.
Well, that kind of relates to some ancient texts because the chapter Rostau, which is ancient Giza, says this shrine is called the Temple of Teptuef, which translates to Anubis upon his hill. So right there you can clearly see he's on the hill.
Right. So, and then this footage now it flips over to where exiting from the Sphinx. When you go and see this, it's kind of like the tourist trap. They make you walk out. You can't go back into the Valley Temple after you've come out. So this is kind of if you were looking front on at the Valley Temple, this would be the left-hand side. We're walking towards the front of it as you cut around the side. And again, you just get a sense for the massive scope of these limestone blocks that were once all cased in granite. And the interesting thing about some of these granite casing stones is that they fit the erosion on the limestone blocks. Like they were cut on the back to actually match the shape of some of the erosion on the limestone blocks, which begs the question, how long were the limestone blocks there before it was cased in granite?
Right. And just think about that technique and how absurd that sounds to us today.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
It is.
What But this area here, what we see today, you got to picture all water out here when this thing was built.
Yeah, right. So that was we'll get into that. I know we have some. Maybe we can. You know what we might do is I might flip back. We might flip to this look at the front of the Sphinx temple. Sorry, the Valley Temple, and we can talk about that because this whole area, as you said, this was all supposedly a harbor or a lagoon.
Right.
It gives us that connection to water. And let me just see what this changes to here. I think, okay, so yeah, let me flip to this end video because this is kind of a look out the front here again, and we can talk a little bit about what John Anthony West showed here and what's been done in this area out the front.
When this place was built, you would have needed to be in a boat right here.
Yeah.
To make this footage.
It's an interesting spot, and again, I kind of show in a few of my videos how engineered the entire plateau is. You can go around the edges of the Giza plateau and find just blocks and layers of masonry work where they've leveled it up to the level of the limestone plateau, if you like.
The leveling of the plateau is one of the most incredible features of the whole plateau, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of work that went into that, and people say that they kind of dispute whether the Sphinx was built at the same time as the three pyramids here, but you have the same foundation base right in front here as you do up by the pyramids, right?
Right. Yep.
Huge blocks.
Huge blocks.
Massive foundation. Yep.
Yeah, and even more interestingly is that they've dug in front, or they've sunk test pits in front of this, and given that it's a limestone bedrock, there's no granite in this area. They drilled down something like, what do you say, 50 or 60 feet, and they hit granite blocks.
Yeah, I was reviewing that footage. I have a video called The Sphinx Harbor, and John Anthony West is right out in front of a PVC pipe where they sank a test rod down. They hit granite down at 22 meters.
Wow.
Now, I'm not sure how many feet 22 meters is. What would that be?
A bit more than 60.
Almost 70 feet?
Yeah, just about, yeah.
So why would granite be down that far? So I've seen a few websites where they think that there was a basin out here made of granite that covered this whole area here, and ships sailed into it, and it kind of fit the story with the afterlife. I mean, think of their ships sailing the Celestial Nile, the Milky Way, and then the ships and the necropolis here sailing on the Nile. It kind of matched up to their mythology.
Yeah. The other thing I've heard out the front here is that they found a boat. I mean, they've dug up a boat in this area, excavated it in front of the temple, the Valley Temple, and then they just reburied it. It wasn't a particularly big or important boat, and they reburied it in the ground to preserve it, which is something that happens. It's the best place to keep a lot of things. They literally can't store all of the stuff that they dig up.
On the far left there, you can see Kinkawe's tomb is what they call it.
Yep.
The very far left there is an ancient causeway coming down to kind of by the Sphinx here. But they uncovered that maybe about 8-9 years ago, and there is an ancient harbor down there that leads from that small temple on the very far left that we call Kinkawe's tomb. We
will get another look at that because what I can flip to here is kind of the top of the causeway. So what back in the day, there's the Valley Temple wasn't the only just gigantic temple made from limestone and granite. There were a couple of others. One was what they would call, I guess, the Pyramid Temple that was at the foot of the second pyramid. And this is that area here. It's what connects the causeway that runs to the Sphinx and that Valley Temple up to the second pyramid. And this is the remnants of that temple up near the second pyramid. And you have the same thing at the front of the third pyramid, for that matter, just gigantic blocks of limestone and granite.
And those are incredibly eroded.
Very eroded, yeah.
And do you think these were buried for a lot of time by sand, or are they too high up? Or
I think, well, they're on the plateau, and they were definitely buried in some sand because they're at the base of the pyramids, which had their first sort of few layers or first few courses buried in stone. So I'm sure that some of these were buried in sand. They may not have been buried as long because they're at that higher elevation, but I'm sure unless you keep them up, just the wind over time is going to pile up sand and slowly bury this stuff. But there's so much to see outside of just the pyramids at Giza. You could spend a number of days just walking around looking at this. And there you can see the back of the Sphinx's head there as we look down as the Great Pyramid. As we said, this is all in front of the Khafra Pyramid, or second pyramid. Whether or not it's Khafra's is debatable in my opinion. And then that's the what would you say that was called again? That's
It's called King Kawe's tomb, and I think she was a queen coming from the Old Kingdom. And basically what that is one structure made out of the bedrock, and then on top there is a layering of Old Kingdom stonework. Right. And she was buried in there, like they had the balls to bury one of their queens on top of one of the original structures. Nice. But from my research, I think what the original purpose of that, and I think it is an original structure, Giza, is back in pre-dynastic and times we have totally lost track of. That's where they did the mummification ceremony in.
Oh, okay, right.
And if you are down at a special spot by the Sphinx where people theorize they did alignments from, the setting sun on December 21st goes down right over King Kawe's tomb. December 21st, the day the sun dies. So yep. I think that matches up with how the very old, what we call Egyptians today, did things. Use the sun, archaeoastronomy in their monuments.
Yeah, well, we're approaching that time of year here again, where the sun dies on the horizon and it appears to die for 3 days and is then resurrected. There are some relatively modern stories that involve that concept.
Right. My mom is born on Christmas, and I tried to tell her that she has the same journey, or she is literally representing the sun's journey over the year at her birth. And she looked at me like, what are you talking about? She just didn't know what I was getting at.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole resurrection story. It's very clearly aligned with that. And I like this is again, just the erosion that's happened to these blocks is just astonishing to me. You see this in front of the third pyramid. A lot of this stuff just seems just vastly ancient. And look, it may be that it doesn't take that long, but it's just intuition kind of looking at this that suggests that it is just vastly ancient.
A lot of different types of erosion, especially down closer to the Sphinx, where I think Antoine Giegel, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she showed where there was like sea erosion from a shore, an ancient shore erosion on those rocks down there.
Wave erosion?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there is some space. I'm not familiar with that video, but it's there's definitely those curved spots. In fact, the best example I can think of is in the megalithic work out the front of the third pyramid. There's some definite what looks like exactly that. It looks like it could be wave erosion. And this is the causeway. This is this just massively engineered 50-foot wide causeway that runs down.
It says it took them, in some report you hear, it took them 10 years to build just the causeway.
Yeah.
So a lot of work.
Yeah, well, that's the joke around the timing. I have a whole video on just the improbable timelines of the Old Kingdom pyramid builders. No, we don't need a camel ride today. Thank you, sir. There is, when you add up not just the pyramids, but all of the ancillary work and the basalt floors and the Valley Temple and all of these other structures, it seems really improbable that this could be done within, one guy's lifetime. And it gets even more improbable when you look at like Sneferu, who was supposedly responsible for the Maidum Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid, and all of the structures around them.
He was a busybody, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and as I pointed out in one of my videos, the way that they can justify him doing that is the idea that it's been proven that Khufu built his pyramid inside of 20 to 25 years, which is by no means proven. But they're like, well, if you assume that he did that in 20 to 25 years, then we can extend that out to say, well, it took Sneferu 45 years to build 3 of them. I'm not sure it works quite that way, but okay, there's some dodgy logic.
But I think the ancient text has a name for the causeways, And I think in the ancient texts they are called receiving paths,
Right.
which would make sense in their context, what we see today. Everything out there.
I just want to skip to some of the interesting things that are on the side of these causeways. You have to. There's a couple of features here. You can see how it's all been. These are all blocks. Petrie talks about it being a couple of layers of blocks, but there's, again, you get a sense of how well engineered the overall plateau is. Is that you also have these shafts from time to time in places that seem to go down, 100 feet or more. These giant, just holes in the ground, and of course there's the
to the underworld.
To the underworld, yeah, and
Yep.
it's. Yeah, of course, there's the Osiris shaft, which is 3 different levels, goes down to like 120 feet or something, with water table at the bottom and giant single-piece granite boxes that are too big.
How close is the Osiris shaft to where we are right now?
I believe it's just to the right here. I believe
Right.
it's in here in the mix to the right. I haven't been in there. I've seen Brian Forrester's footage of it from in there, but I am going in there when I get this trip next year to Egypt organized. I mean, we're getting close to announcing that. It's just the itinerary's sorted out, just going through the last sets of details. But definitely part of that will be a visit down the Osiris shaft, which I'm really excited about.
So if that was Anubis in the ancient times, that would make sense that it says Anubis guards in front of the box coffin of Orion because the Osiris shaft is down there.
Right.
It kind of makes sense.
It does make sense, yeah. So this is coming down, and again, this is kind of a look at some of the this is the construction work that is just all adjacent to this area. It's not typically explored by a lot of people. People tend to roll up because they can just drive you up to the pyramids, and they'll drop you right at the pyramids, and you get to go in the pyramids and get back on the bus and leave and come down to the Valley Temple and look around. But if you are at Giza, I'd definitely recommend walking the causeway, walking the edges of the plateau. You can pretty much go anywhere you like. There is construction everywhere here. There's just layers of masonry. And, I mean,
have you ever been down to what they call the Wall of the Crows?
I think I know what you're talking about. I've got some footage from there, but I haven't been there myself.
I think it's down more in front of the kind of straight ahead and then down to the left. It's kind of down by the ancient harbor down there.
Yeah, I do have footage from down there, but it's not a place that I've hit. It's on my list for the next trip. Yeah, I've got a long list for next time. It's been a couple of years for me now, and I have been slowly adding to that list. I'm going to be busy when I'm here.
I would be like a kid in a candy store, I think.
You would, yeah. You should.
I think my friends and family would never see me again. I would just refuse to leave.
Yeah. There's a lot to see. It's worth seeing. I mean, I think I guess it's good news. It seems like tourism's picking up in Egypt again. I know next year they're opening the Grand Museum, or they're planning to, which is good. I think they're going to have a lot more space to display a lot more of the stuff that is just been left in warehouses because they couldn't fit it on display in the Cairo Museum, which really isn't that big. But this this Grand Egyptian Museum is quite the project.
What are we looking at?
So this is just some of the, I guess you'd call them tombs, but this is some of the structures off to the right-hand side of the causeway as you walk down it. Let me skip forward here.
People get a little confused when I say, the ancient necropolis, and then they say, well, you said the pyramids weren't tombs, so how could it be a necropolis? Well, people have been burying important rulers out here way back in time to time before that is not recorded to us, because what they do is they reuse old tombs and making newer tombs.
That's right.
And in some old dynasty tombs, we have found inscriptions of kings and pharaohs that we have not identified yet.
Right.
So, I mean, this was always a place of burial, always a sacred necropolis where rulers were always buried. Now, why? Because the pyramids were always there. Fourth dynasty rulers did not come and say, well, we're going to put 3 huge, mighty structures right in the middle of this sacred necropolis that goes way back into time immemorial. The pyramids were always there.
Yep.
if we have first dynasty, pre-dynastic people buried here, there was a reason. This was always a sacred necropolis because the pyramids and what we call the Sphinx was always there.
I agree, and it's true that all of these are in fact necropolises. I just think that it's disputed whether or not the pyramids were tombs. There's very little evidence for that, but for sure people were buried all over these places. And you find the same thing at Mydoom. They call Mydoom the Mydoom necropolis, and Saqqara as well. In fact, I've been exploring some of the catacombs underneath Saqqara, and there are quite literally chambers just 3 feet high, full of human bones and remains. Just these,
people kind of blanket over and they say, well, a pharaoh we've never found a burial in a pyramid, or we've never found hieroglyphs in a pyramid. Well, there are smaller pyramids that we have found burials in, but the whole question is, it seems to be that they were repurposed by the dynastic Egyptians.
Exactly, yeah.
There's a few burials that we have found. We have found some burials in like a mastaba, I think, out by Mydoom, where the bone just kind of disintegrated into dust or whatever, that story. And it's very hard to put the whole picture together when you have so many stories and so many weird things and so many views on it.
Yeah, I picture a lot of this as a process of inheritance and renovation. Mydoom is a good example. They did. I think it's whether or not they got in there later and put a body in the box. I think in a lot of cases the megalithic large boxes have been repurposed where they could for burial. There's it's even if you find something in it, that may not necessarily mean that's what its original purpose was over the period of thousands of years, much as they likely did with the Sphinx. I mean, those monuments and objects get inherited. It's always found to be sacred, which is why you have so much burial, and they get treated as necropolises, and they were likely all used as ceremonial spaces. But it doesn't exactly speak to the original purpose of these places.
And some of these places, they don't even attach the old dynasty to. They say these sarcophagus that have nothing on them, these massive sarcophagus come from the 12th dynasty.
Right.
Well, I'm going to be making a video that shows 12th dynasty Egyptian sarcophagus, and they're highly decorated. Some of them, there isn't a space on them, or there isn't a hieroglyph or a scene on them. But then again, they say some of these massive sarcophagus that have nothing on them are from the 12th dynasty. That makes no sense whatsoever, and it should be offending to anybody who wants to get to the truth on these things.
Yeah, or apply logic to it. Yeah. I have the same issue with a lot of those inconsistencies, and even in places like Winisa's pyramid, which has the pyramid text in it. It's quite beautiful. It's not carved into the granite. They've plastered over the walls and then written their text on top of it, which again, much like the box at the Serapeum that has all the writing on it, doesn't seem to be consistent with the techniques used to originally build it. It could well have been opened and done later at some point because it was used for ceremonial purposes. That's why I think our Egyptologists, we understand a lot about the dynastic Egyptians, and I don't dispute a lot of what we say about the dynastic Egyptians. I just don't think they built everything on site. They certainly used the monuments, and we know a lot about their culture, but that doesn't say that they necessarily built everything that's here. And in fact, there's very little evidence that they did build some of these original monuments here. Like you said, when you look at the Sphinx, there's there's a lot that is still unsaid when it comes to who built this. There's not any scenes showing them building pyramids, things like that.
But the Serapeum hieroglyphs, I've been looking into hieroglyphs for about 2 years now, and what I've come to learn is you look at places like the Temple of Dendera, or we talked about this yesterday, the Temple of Horus at Edfu, some of those ancient places where what they say the Dendera light bulb is, but that whole scene. I mean, the ancient Egyptians, their best artists and their best craftsmen did the hieroglyphs. Because they were so important. They call them the language of the gods, and I think that all comes from the builders of these places. They were so important to them, and those hieroglyphs on the Serapeum boxes are, if I would classify them, what I've looked at them, I would say amateur at best.
Yeah, graffiti.
Because there are certain features of hieroglyphs that are so important that you need to put into them to make them very distinctive, and it's amateurish at best.
It is. Yeah, it doesn't in any way reflect the technology or the capability of whoever built the boxes. So this, and we can end on this older footage here. I've got a couple of nice little clips of some older footage from the 1930s. I think it's around that period. This is actually footage from some rich people's honeymoon, actually, where they toured the world.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and it's like they made a video of their honeymoon. If there was an Instagram, I'm sure it would have been posted up there in the day, but they were visiting. You can see this is also repair work in the 1930s on the Paws, but I always like these older clips. You get a little bit of a different perspective on what this looked like 100 years ago.
Lions' paws are short and stubby.
Right.
I made a video where I just could not accept in any way that these are lions' arms and paws, and maybe I'll leave that link in a video when I upload this.
Yeah, do that. And I've seen that video because those shots of the original Paws from 100 years before this footage in the 1830s shows them to be a lot longer, much more like
they don't look like Anubis paws. They are literally Anubis paws, and you can really tell by that comparison I make.
Yeah, and there's that statue of Anubis in Vegas that you compared
which
to,
is a perfect replica of one they found in Tut's tomb. So
yeah,
I think that I look at that. I look at that every time I in Luxor and kind of give him a pat on the head. And
yeah. And not much else has changed. There's still jockeying camel rides around Giza Plateau today. You can.
Have you ever rode a camel?
No, not particularly. I have not spent any time on a camel. I've ridden horses. That's probably good enough. Yeah, you'll definitely get the opportunity if you go to Giza. They will let you. They will give you the chance. There's one other little clip here that I wanted to show, which has a little bit of volume to it, which you won't hear, but you will hear in the clip once it's done. So.
The pyramids, the colossal sepulchres of kings, and the hugest structures ever reared by man stand upon the edge of the desert, their bases covered by sand. Tourists pose before the great monuments that were built nearly 5,000 years ago. All things, it is said, fear time, but time fears the pyramids. Close by crouches the Sphinx, the gigantic figure of a lion with a human head, typifying the union of intelligence and strength. Built over 6,000 years ago, it is probably the oldest relic of human workmanship the world knows. Time and Muslim fanaticism have destroyed the features of its face, but this relic of Egyptian antiquity still stands, solemn and silent, a symbol of eternity.
So one of the quotes that's in there, he says, all things fear time, but time fears the pyramids. It's like
I think I've used that quote before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting spot. I mean, our civilization's like the blinking of an eye to these monuments. I'm sure they'll still be here long after our civilization is gone.
Well, literally in the ancient text, it calls it the monument to eternity.
Right.
That's not something that was just made up. They literally call it that in the text. So they were thinking that these places were going to be around for as long as we are, probably.
Indeed. All right. Well, that was a good little, I think a good little review of some of the raw footage and just our thoughts on the Sphinx and the Valley Temple. I know, Chuck, you've done a ton of videos on these topics. I have really yet to touch on them. I've got one of my research projects is kind of collecting a lot of the early explorer accounts of them, and I do intend on doing a more researched and produced video, particularly on the technology of the Valley Temple. I find that to be just fascinating in terms of the size and the precision of that whole structure.
Yep, it appears to be something totally out of place with what we say are dynastic Egyptian ruins.
Yeah, which is obviously in my wheelhouse of stuff that I like to go look at. Cool. All right, well, that'll probably do us for today. I hope you guys all enjoyed that, and let us know in the comments what you think about the Sphinx and the Valley Temple. It's places that I sort of would never get tired of looking at, and certainly going to visit, which I hope to do again next year. And let us know.
I hope to get out there with you someday, Ben. I know, not sure about next year, but someday I hope to get out there. I'm not sure if I'd like to be restricted to a tour group because I like to just go off and do my own thing. But certainly I think it would benefit to have, go out there with somebody who knows what they're doing and what they're seeing. And Yusuf, I'd like to talk to him.
Indeed, yeah, that would be a good way to do it. Yeah, have just a couple people go out there. That's another way of doing Egypt. People, you can hire Yusuf as well, and I'd recommend that if you can swing it, that kind of thing. You take 2 or 3 people and just go out and spend a few days hitting various sites. It's a great way to see.
Is that the way you and Luke did it originally?
Yeah, we did it a couple times. We've done the tour groups with Hancock, and then we've done little smaller groups just with Luke and I, and we just get Yusuf and Muhammad or whatever, and we'll go out for a week just hitting a few various sites. It's harder to see sites away from the Giza area. You've got to do travel and all the rest of it, but there's so much to see in the Giza area. That's an easy way to spend a week or two just hitting sites and getting a kind of an up close personal look at everything that you want to spend time on, and spend as much time as you like doing it. It's that's the groups are great because with groups you can afford things like special permissions to get into places because you can spread the cost. Right. It's usually like a couple grand to get these permissions, but and in a group in a tour you can do 3 or 4 of those and spread that cost around so everybody gets to experience it.
Sure.
But
I saw Brian's video that his group went down there. That would be a fascinating place to go down below that.
Yeah, the Osiris Shaft.
Yep.
Yeah, so places like that, typically places like Abu Simbel, Abu Ghraib. The Great Pyramid is a good example too. You have to rent that if you want to get in to see the Queen's Chamber or the Subterranean Chamber, which I've been into both of those, and just really recommend the chance to see them. I've also been up there where just on a regular tourist ticket and just on my own, and normally you only ever get into the so-called King's Chamber, ascending passageway, Grand Gallery, King's Chamber, but you can't get into the Queen's Chamber, you can't get into the Subterranean Chamber. So
all right, Ben, I enjoyed the talk today.
Yeah.
You have some great footage.
Yeah, man.
I always just enjoy looking at your footage and chatting with you, but I'm glad we recorded this today. I'm sure people will enjoy it.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing that, Chuck, and I'm sure we'll do it again.
All right.
Cheers.
Hope you thought this was interesting. You have a good day, Ben.
Yeah, and I will see everyone in the next one. Peace.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, well, that was Chuck from the CF Apps 7865 YouTube channel and myself discussing the Valley Temple and the Sphinx at Giza. I hope you all enjoyed that. I do want to say just a huge thank you to everyone that supports the channel. You guys are the reason that I'm able to spend the time to make and edit all of these videos. I very much appreciate the support. And if you do like the sort of thing that I'm doing on this channel, please do consider supporting the channel. There are a number of ways to do that, or as Randall Carlson likes to say from one of his podcasts.
What money? Somebody's gonna send me money, oh boy!
There's a number of ways you can do that. It's all outlined at unchartedx.com/support, so please do check that out. And I know Chuck's recently also launched his own Patreon page, so I've got a number of videos that I'm working on to try and get out before the end of this year, so I will see you all in the next one. Cheers.